When ancient Rome fell, its justice system crumbled with it. But what many don't realize is just how brutal and calculated Roman punishments truly were. While we often picture gladiator fights and crucifixions, the reality was far more systematic and psychologically devastating than Hollywood could ever portray. Picture this. You're a Roman citizen accused of a crime. You might think your citizenship would protect you, but you'd be wrong. The Romans had perfected the art of punishment to such a degree that they could strip away your dignity, your identity, and your humanity long before they took your life. And they did it all in the name of justice. What made Roman punishments so terrifyingly effective wasn't just their brutality, it was their precision. Every lashing, every humiliation, every form of execution was carefully designed to send a message that would echo through the empire for generations. The Romans understood something we've forgotten. Punishment wasn't just about the individual. It was about controlling an entire civilization through fear. From the moment you were accused of a crime in ancient Rome, you entered a world where your social status determined not just your guilt or innocence, but the very nature of your suffering. Roman law recognized different classes of people, and each class faced dramatically different punishments for the same crimes. If you were a wealthy patrician, you might face exile or a hefty fine. But if you were a slave or a foreigner, the same crime could result in crucifixion, being thrown to wild beasts, or worse. The Romans called this system justice, but it was really a sophisticated machine for maintaining social order through terror. Take theft, for example. If a wealthy Roman stole from his neighbor, he might be required to pay back 4 times the value of what he took. But if a slave stole the same item, he could be crucified, his body left to rot as a warning to others. The crime was identical, but the punishment depended entirely on who you were in Roman society. This wasn't an accident or an oversight. Roman lawmakers deliberately created a system where punishment escalated based on social class. They understood that different groups required different levels of deterrence. The wealthy feared losing their status and property, so financial penalties and exile were effective. But for the lower classes, who had little to lose materially, only the threat of excruciating physical punishment could maintain order. Consider the case of adultery, one of the most complex crimes in Roman law. If a patrician woman was caught in adultery, she might face divorce and loss of her dowry, a serious but survivable punishment. Her lover, if he was of equal social standing, might face exile or a substantial fine. But if that same woman had an affair with a slave, the slave would be tortured to death in the most agonizing way possible, while the woman might face the same financial penalties as before. The crime was adultery in both cases, but the punishments were worlds apart. The Romans had dozens of different methods of execution, each carefully chosen based on the crime, the criminal's social status, and the message they wanted to send. Crucifixion, perhaps their most famous punishment, was reserved almost exclusively for slaves, rebels, and foreigners. No Roman citizen could legally be crucified, not because the Romans were squeamish about the method, but because they understood the power of symbolism. Crucifixion was the ultimate humiliation, a punishment that stripped away every shred of human dignity. But crucifixion was just the beginning. The Romans also employed burning alive, being thrown to wild animals in the arena, drowning in sewage, being buried alive, and dozens of other methods that were specifically designed to maximize both physical pain and psychological terror. Each method sent a different message to different audiences. Being thrown to the beasts, for instance, was often reserved for Christians and other religious dissidents. This wasn't just about killing them. It was about demonstrating the power of the Roman gods over foreign deities. The arena became a stage where Roman superiority was literally enacted through violence, with thousands of spectators cheering as criminals were torn apart by lions, bears, and other predators. The psychological impact of these public executions cannot be overstated. Romans didn't just kill criminals, they turned their deaths into entertainment that reinforced social hierarchies and political power. Every citizen who watched a crucifixion or a beast hunt was receiving a lesson in obedience. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who challenge Rome. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of Roman punishment was how it corrupted the very concept of justice. Over time, the Romans began using their sophisticated punishment system not just to deter crime, but to eliminate political opponents, silence critics, and maintain absolute control over their vast empire. Treason became an elastic concept that could be applied to almost anyone who displeased those in power. Under emperors like Caligula and Nero, the punishment system became a tool of terror that targeted not just criminals, but anyone who might pose a threat to imperial authority. Wealthy senators could be accused of treason for the slightest perceived slight, their property confiscated and their families destroyed. The very sophistication of Roman law became its weakness, as clever prosecutors learned to manipulate legal technicalities to justify almost any punishment. The Romans also pioneered the use of torture as an investigative tool, something that would echo through legal systems for centuries to come. They believed that truth could only be extracted from slaves and foreigners through physical pain, while free citizens were supposedly trustworthy enough to testify without coercion. This created a legal system where your social status determined not just your punishment, but whether you could even be believed in court. Torture methods included the rack, which slowly pulled joints apart, burning with hot irons, crushing fingers and toes, and psychological torments designed to break the mind as well as the body. Roman interrogators became experts in human anatomy and psychology, learning exactly how to inflict maximum pain without causing immediate death. They could keep someone alive and conscious for days while systematically destroying their body piece by piece. What made Roman torture particularly horrifying was its bureaucratic nature. These weren't crimes of passion or moments of rage. They were carefully planned procedures carried out by trained professionals following established protocols. The Romans had manuals describing the most effective torture techniques, guides for interrogators on how to maximize pain and minimize death, and detailed records of which methods worked best on different types of people. The lasting impact of Roman punishment practices extended far beyond the fall of the empire. Many of their methods and legal principles were adopted by later civilizations, including medieval European kingdoms and even some modern legal systems. The idea that punishment should fit not just the crime, but the social status of the criminal persisted for centuries, as did the use of public execution as both deterrent and entertainment. Perhaps most disturbingly, the Roman approach to punishment revealed something fundamental about human nature and the relationship between power and justice. When a civilization becomes powerful enough to impose its will without constraint, the temptation to use that power for control rather than justice becomes almost irresistible. The Romans started with genuine legal principles designed to protect society, but gradually transformed their justice system into an instrument of terror that served only those in power. Understanding Roman punishment practices isn't just an exercise in historical curiosity. It's a reminder of how quickly justice can become injustice when power is concentrated in the wrong hands, and how sophisticated legal systems can be corrupted to serve the interests of the few rather than the many. The Romans may have fallen, but the lessons of their brutal justice system remain painfully relevant today. The next time you hear someone praise the efficiency of authoritarian systems or argue that harsh punishments are necessary for social order, remember the Romans. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Roman punishment was its deliberate spectacle. Roman authorities understood that true deterrence came not just from the severity of punishment, but from its visibility. Public executions were carefully choreographed events designed to reinforce social order and imperial power. The amphitheater became a theater of death, where punishment merged with entertainment. The arena games, while often remembered for gladiatorial combat, served a darker purpose as venues for public execution. Criminals condemned to death faced the beasts in elaborate scenarios that mocked their crimes. Those guilty of arson might be burned alive in costumes representing mythological figures consumed by flames. Murderers could be torn apart by wild animals in reenactments of ancient legends. The crowds cheered not just for sport, but for justice they believed was being served. These spectacles followed a brutal hierarchy of suffering. Citizens might face a relatively quick death by sword, while slaves and foreigners endured prolonged torment. The method of execution itself communicated the victim's social status and the nature of their crime. Crucifixion, perhaps Rome's most infamous punishment, was reserved for slaves, pirates, and enemies of the state. The slow agony could last for days, with victims displayed along major roads as warnings to all who passed. Roman legal texts reveal the calculating precision behind these punishments. The Digest of Justinian meticulously catalogued which crimes merited which punishments, creating a bureaucracy of brutality. Judges received detailed instructions on torture techniques, proper procedures for interrogation, and methods for extracting confessions. What emerged was not random violence, but systematic cruelty codified into law. The psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate victims. Families of the condemned faced their own forms of punishment through association. Property could be confiscated, children disinherited, and entire bloodlines marked with shame. Roman society operated on networks of patronage and reputation, making social death almost as devastating as physical execution. Perhaps most disturbing was how these practices became normalized through repetition and legal sanction. What might shock us today was simply Tuesday afternoon entertainment for Roman citizens. Children grew up watching public executions as routine civic events. The brutality was not hidden or shameful, but celebrated as evidence of Roman strength and divine favor. Yet this system of terror ultimately contributed to Rome's decline. The vast resources devoted to surveillance, punishment, and spectacle drained the empire's strength. Fear bred resentment among subject populations, while the ruling class became increasingly paranoid and isolated. The very mechanisms designed to preserve Roman power eventually undermined it from within. The legacy of Roman punishment extended far beyond the empire's borders. Medieval and early modern legal systems adopted many Roman practices, carrying forward traditions of public execution, torture for confession, and punishment as spectacle. The Roman model of state-sanctioned violence influenced legal development across Europe for centuries. Modern archaeological discoveries continue to reveal the scope of Roman brutality. Mass graves near amphitheaters contain the remains of execution victims, while graffiti in prisons preserves the final words of the condemned. These findings remind us that behind the marble monuments and literary achievements lay a foundation of systematic violence that touched every level of society. The Roman approach to punishment reflected deeper beliefs about power, justice, and human nature. Romans viewed harsh punishment not as cruelty, but as necessity, a bulwark against the chaos they believed would consume civilization without firm control. This worldview justified extraordinary measures in the name of preserving order, creating a self-perpetuating cycle where fear of disorder bred increasingly harsh responses to any challenge to authority. Understanding Roman punishment practices offers sobering lessons about how easily legal systems can become instruments of oppression. When punishment serves primarily to demonstrate power rather than achieve justice, it transforms courts into theaters and law into performance. The Roman example reminds us that the true measure of any legal system lies not in its capacity for punishment, but in its commitment to fairness, proportionality, and human dignity. As we examine these ancient practices from our modern perspective, we're confronted with uncomfortable questions about our own systems of justice. While we may congratulate ourselves on progress beyond Roman brutality, the fundamental tensions between order and freedom, punishment and rehabilitation, continue to shape legal systems worldwide. The ghosts of Rome's amphitheaters still whisper warnings about what happens when the machinery of justice becomes a tool for domination rather than a guardian of human rights.